Hi, this is Privateer Station, and sorry, recently we did not have much time to record these little snippets before the videos and tell you thank you for following us. Life is busy and we barely have time to translate the material that's coming, but we do remember about you. Thank you so very much, dear members, supporters. Every comment, every like you leave, that definitely helps us to continue to do our work. With our special thanks today, we highlight Andrei Patinko, Anya Kuchta, and Paul. Thank you guys for supporting us. And today's stream is an unusual one. They haven't been for a while, but finally, Yuri Romanenko, Sergei Datsuk, and Alex Arestovich got together, had a chance to meet in one studio and discuss the possibilities for Ukraine. What do they hold right now? What scenarios are gone? What scenarios are still available? Which of them are better? Which of them are worse? And how can Ukraine find the winning path among Scylla and Charybdis? I think this was a very insightful discussion, and hope you guys will enjoy it. Thanks again for following us. Here we go. Friends, good evening, everybody. We are starting our historic, I think that would be appropriate word. Sergei Datsuk is with us today, much beloved by many, our Ukrainian philosopher. We also have Alex Arestovich, who came back from his other meetings and activities overseas and is ready to dig deep into a very serious conversation. We are going to talk about the game at the bottom of the war. Why did we formulate this topic this way? Because as people with analytical mindset, observing recent events, we logically come to certain conclusions. There cannot be that Ukraine is not given shells, which they do have a plenty in Europe and in the United States. Missiles are hitting our infrastructure, and yesterday there were damages. Before that, there was Tripolskaya power generation plant destroyed, and during the last quarter, most of the Ukrainian electric transfer capacity was eliminated. And at the same time, there is a plan, call it Turkish plan, Erdogan's plan, is being proposed about a possible truce, where the first article is strategic advanced armaments, which Turkey has no relation to, is posted. So this agreement is between Russia and United States. Not Turkey has nothing to do with it, and that implies immediately that probably these two wonderful countries are really behind this suggestion brought up by Turkey. So we're trying to analyze these elements together and how do they jive. Sergei, could you comment on this? Right. When I was thinking about these items you mentioned, sooner or later every big war turns into the war of attrition, especially when it is the war between relatively equal warring parties. And eventually, one of these warring parties will probably find a break in this war and find a way to push it one way or another. So 22 was one break, 23 was a different one, and 24 will try to push it the other direction. But when both sides finally get tired of this, they understand that it cannot go on forever. And they're trying to change the game, or trying to find ways to change the game. And we can analyze these trends, and this was my precipice for this discussion as well. So how do you see this game now? What are the subjects of this game? What motivations do they have? This is a lengthy conversation, Yuri. One analyst, if you know, Alex Arestovich, was recently discussing some aspects of this theme, and he pushed me. He has a good habit in his thesis. They often push some buttons and enlighten people like myself to dive even deeper into that subject. I would prefer him to talk about the elements that he noticed, but he, as I see, captured those contradictions that you formulated from the point of view that there are very opposite or different directed vectors being sent out in the world. On one hand, we are saying that we'll lose if United States will not give us aid. On the other hand, we are preparing counteroffensive. On the third hand, we are ready to strike peace, or at least consider options for that. And these three messages are being sent at the same time. So are we dealing with schizophrenia here or what? Alexei, perhaps you want to chime in right here. Indeed, it was in several interviews of President Zelensky, and even in one, he managed to send several signals. He's sending them to different parties. We just need to highlight these parties. America is playing its old game, good old game that they've been playing all along. Last time they played it very actively in Yugoslavia. Before that, they were playing that in 1973 during Arab-Israeli War of the Judgment Day. And what happened then is when Anwar Sadat, president of Egypt, tried to get his country off the Soviet needle and out of the Soviet area of influence, and Americans decided to include that into their own sphere of influence. They allowed Egypt and Israel to deplete each other, and they were following the idea that if Israel is running low on arms, they would support them, but carefully, so they don't let Israel take Cairo. And when both parties were worn out with slight advantage on the Israel side because of the heroics and skill, and Egypt has lost enough of the potential accumulated from Soviet support, then the United States made a proposal to both sides, which they could not refuse from, and both of them ended up in the US sphere of influence to a much higher degree than before. And that's what's happening here, I think. They are allowing us to deplete Russia. They are not depleting Ukraine so much. They are depleting the fiery messaging that's in our society and our vision of running to the borders of, not so much the borders of 91, but to the borders of the 2022. And from the point of view of Biden's administration, where Sullivan is one of the truest students of Kissinger, and that's on the globalist side, that's what prevails there, the Kissinger doctrine. So he is walking lockstep with the main doctrine strategy. They're depleting our fiery stance in Ukraine. They're following the polling. They're monitoring situation very keenly. And now it moves into an interesting sphere where the only obstacle for peace is President Zelensky, and that part of Ukrainians who do not want truce on the Russian terms. And in Russia, the only obstacle is the alarmist party of war who blindly believe that they'll take Lvov in 2 to 3 weeks if they exert enough pressure. Both of these are obstacles for the peace treaty that could have been presented for Biden's election campaign, which could have been presented as a big achievement that Trump is only promising peace and Biden already managed to pacify both sides. And also, these two obstacles preclude America from exerting a better control over both sides. And that depletion stance of the United States will continue until we get to the point where both sides will be depleted so deep that in Ukraine the public opinion will change, and it's slowly happening. Zelensky's support is waning, and more people are thinking about possible truce with Russia. And in Russia, it's a bad war as well. They're wasting tens of thousands of people to just take Avdiivka and hundreds of tanks. So with this tempo, they'll never reach Kramatorsk or Slaviansk, really. They won't, of course, get to Dnieper and Zaporozhye borders. So now about the bigger cycle. Russians are preparing for counteroffensive. Situation is mirror-like from a year ago when we were preparing for counteroffensive and they were digging in. Now we are preparing for their counteroffensive and digging in. We will break their attempt at advance. We definitely will not let them advance much. Maybe they'll get a little bit, but they won't succeed at large. So now we'll be at an interesting stalemate. Ukrainians tried counteroffensive, Russians tried counteroffensive. None of them worked. And Americans are expecting that on both sides, the moods will go lower. And they're doing the same thing as what they did back when we took Kherson. They stopped supplying us for 3 months, talking to Russia to not go into the winter warfare and not hit our infrastructure. And Russia didn't listen to them. They destroyed our energy infrastructure. They still continue to fight actively during winter months. And they they even adopted 4 regions of Ukraine into their constitution. Now United States are doing the same trick all over again. They're not supplying us, telling Russians that, look, we're not supporting Ukraine, but you should cancel your counteroffensive. And on this, well, let's restart Istanbul agreements and come to some peace accords. Russians will continue their counteroffensive. They will try that big counteroffensive. They don't care about United States suggestions, which of course are not Erdogan's suggestions. He was just a figure who was asked to bring it into the sphere. It is definitely coming from United States. And this is what I was talking about since autumn, that this war will result in either 10 to 15 years of continuous fighting, or in an attempt to create a collective security system. And from United States, we get this message, this attempt from Erdogan to create some position between United States and Russia, some security accord between these two sides. If you notice, they're not even talking about Europe there. Europe will probably have their own plan soon that will be bringing to the table Europe and Russia and offering peace terms there. As for the joint position between EU and United States, it doesn't exist. And Putin will be playing on these contradictions between EU and states. They will be counteroffensive 100%. They will not let this opportunity slip by because they seriously expect to get some advantage from it. Understandably, that one of the points of these negotiations will be freezing the war on the current front line. So they're definitely trying to push it further to the left. And this is the situation we're facing for today. And we, in this scheme, can only try to convince our allies to not abandon us completely, but to give us at least something to fight with. So we will be trying to convince our allies, while they will be trying to convince us to come down to some peace accords. The whole situation is impinged on the volume of support and supply from the West. The key is not with us, it is with the West. And they down-regulate the readiness for fighting, continuous fighting on both Russian side and Ukrainian side by their support. Right? If Russians are eager to fight, they will start supplying us more. If we are eager to fight, they will be limiting supplies to us. So, Alexei, I heard that you stated that the game is not equal, meaning that Ukraine and Russia are not on par, because equal game is when either sides are of the same capability, or perhaps you have different kinds of parity when you have disadvantage in one, but you have advantage in something else. But when the game is skewed and one side of this game is fighting because of the given, granted, trusted resources, it means that the equality doesn't depend on you, doesn't depend on your capabilities. You can get it, you can acquire it for a while, but then if external factor changes, you will lose it. So if you run into the game of attrition, then you will definitely lose it. And the core of such a situation is that it births an opportunity to equalize it with blackmail. We are blackmailing the West, telling them that if you do not give us support, we will lose. Russia will go into Europe. You will lose your face. Your values will be toppled. International system of security will be toppled. NATO will be under big question mark. United Nations will also likely not be trusted anymore by anyone. Russia is blackmailing with their nukes. On our side, we're trying to prove to the West that Russian nuclear blackmail is a bluff. From the Russian side, they're trying to prove, again, to the people who are siding with Kissinger doctrine and who are in realpolitik game, that everything is wrong, everything is different. Those wants and likes expressed by Ukraine is a bluff. That Russian blackmail is real and Ukrainian statement is a bluff. As far as I understand now, Europe and United States are trusting Russian blackmail more than ours. It is more dangerous for them. And that means that their chair under our feet is getting kicked out. You can play the bluff for as long as until the other side understood it. When they understand that it's a bluff, they can even express their concern and express that they're upset at losing their face and values. And periodically you see those figures popping up in the United States and in Europe who come out and say, look, this is a strategic defeat. And those realpolitik figures say, yes, of course, it's horrible, and then continue doing what they're doing. So in this case, blackmail and bluff, they do not really allow us to reach parity with Russia. So I'm trying to find what would give us that missing component to somehow equalize what we have. For example, to come up with a proposal that would be satisfactory for all sides. And I'll stop here and you can perhaps comment what I'm talking about, and then I suggest we analyze 10 points said by Zelensky in comparison with points suggested by Erdogan. And I want to highlight why one of them can work and the others can't. And we can discuss it if you have no objections. Right, Sergey, I will add something for myself here too. There is a component here which is not a bluff, by the way. The hits on Russian oil refineries is not a bluff. This is a definitely new element that touches upon real interests, including Western interests, those companies that are working in the oil industry. They're giving us a trump card, right? If you're not giving us weapons, don't tell us where we should not be hitting. The moment we started attacking their refineries, we saw how the whole world started to hustle and bustle around that and try to talk to us. Listen, there is one more element that is not used, Sergei. Basically what we're doing, as Jean-Paul Belmondo character said in one of his movies, Blackmail and diversion, this is partisan tactics. We're using advanced partisan tactics in Russia. The United States had at some point actually believed that when Ukraine resources will be depleted, everything we could do would be partisan warfare. But it turns out that partisan warfare can seriously affect the global oil market. Well, right, they were expecting us to conduct partisan warfare on our territory in Ukraine, not on Russian territory. This is what broke the framework that was being considered. Right, Alexei? Well, look, guys, the West is in a position when I don't think they're afraid of nuclear blackmail at all. On the political level, they're not really afraid. They modeled, they played several computer games, they're conducting the biggest training exercises for the military since the end of Cold War. 300,000 NATO troops are moving to the border with Russia, and 150,000 of them will remain there after the exercise is over to potentially hold Russia. This is a very serious factor, including aviation and fleet, where Russia is much weaker than the West. So all that blackmail expressed and created by Putin's government ended up with, despite position of the United States, France and Britain signing cordial accords too and saying, well, we have nukes too. From my experience, they're not really afraid of that. Talking to different figures here, they understand that they may need to fight conventional warfare, and if it goes to nukes, they have means to counter. So they're considering peace accord without that much pressure. And Putin, unlike them, understands that he needs to hustle, he needs to rush peace accords. The sooner he gets there, the better it is for him, because for peace accords, he may actually get the Nobel Peace Prize with some help by his sympathizers. But if he fails and doesn't get it at the right moment, he'll be in a much weaker position. And if he does it on time, he will probably become friends with a lot of forces in the West again. And we see that. It sips through the cracks that there are people saying, well, the axis of evil is not exactly that we should reconsider position with Russia. Perhaps we can find a way to work and convince them. And the moment Ukraine found ways to hit Russia painfully, this is when the West actually came back here and said, oh, please hold it. That's when they immediately started pulling our hand. As long as we were dying at the front, nobody really cared. But when we start hitting Russia and their refineries, that's when the West gets concerned. So now we see that peace initiative presented by Erdogan, and we are in a very vulnerable and uncomfortable position. We are basically those people who do not allow everybody to sit down at the negotiation table and go back to the business as usual situation. All right, let's bring the first page to the screen. Alexei, do you see that too? Yes, I do. All right. So if you look at the first article, so look on the left, this is the want of Ukraine. Lower down to Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. So not even the global level, but not even the strategic level of Ukraine. It's more of a tactical. The second article, food security. Third is energy security. These are all wants of Ukraine in the old parlance, with unclear subjects who will be adhering to that. Where is United Nations? Where is NATO? Where is China? Where is United States? So there is definitely a gap apparent here, the absence of support. Number 4, release of all prisoners of war and deportees. That's another want by Ukraine. Erdogan's suggestion is to exchange all prisoners, all for all formula, and then the rest are Ukrainians' wishes from the weaker position. Article number 5. Ukraine wants to restore territorial integrity of Ukraine and confirmation of all borders by Russia within a year in accordance with the UN Charter, which according to Zelensky is not subject to negotiations. Look what Erdogan's suggestion holds, or United States rather. On one hand, guarantees of Ukraine non-bloc status until 2040, but on the other hand, Russia also does not deny Ukraine's joining the European Union, one at the cost of the other, which means that they guarantee to Russia that Ukraine is not joining NATO until 2040, and Ukraine gets an option to join EU, and Russia will not be able to say no. So this is a parity on the trade, where you basically on each article go there and say, okay, you get this, we get this. If every article would be formulated in such a fashion, you see that I combined two articles by Erdogan's into one. So let's listen to the commentary and then we continue. Sergei Arkadyevich, right, we understand that. The blackmail was a usual practice of international relations. Obvious, hidden, concealed, etc. Ukraine lost its military capability, that potential that we had after the fall of Soviet Union, and we gave up our nuclear arms. What other blackmail options do we have? Seriously, none, right? Unless we take something absurd like we'll blow up all our nuclear stations. I already named the right and the left framework for the blackmail that we have. I named them back in autumn and they were rather scandalous. So we have two options, two extremes. One, we can offer to capitulate to Russia and blackmail the West with that capitulation, because they're hoping that we'll be able to use us to deplete Russia, and we can come and say that, well, look, if you're not helping us, we'll surrender to Russia entirely. And what will happen? Russia will basically finish you off then, because they get a huge territory, the whole Black Sea, plus 25 million of new citizens, out of which 3 to 5 million are fantastic fighters, because Ukrainians are great soldiers. And what then? Then, I also added back in autumn, we can also present a collective bill to the West for participating in this war. And that would be one option. We don't really have much other chances, because all our heroic army, the 3 million army, is set on using the Western arms. If the West ceases to support us, in 3 weeks we'll have nothing to fight with. Another option that we can use is a project of peace accord, and I also suggested that, a collective peace accord. I already named two polar opposites. This peace accords should be better than Erdogan's and better than Russian-American suggestions. That would be so good that everybody would see that it's a great opportunity, and we as initiators of this process would be at the table. We have not been at the table before. We have suffered huge losses and we're still not at this discussion table. We're just being pushed one decision or the other on us. So in order to use this option, we would need to grow up a bit, understand the details of situation, and come up with an equally attractive plan, harmonious on different articles. Equal exchange needs to be offered, and interesting points for both parties. We need to get away from the rhetoric of big dogs, and we need to understand what we can do, what we cannot do, what are we not going to give up under any circumstance, and what can we give up on certain conditions. But our rhetoric is still chained to the rhetoric of 1991. These are very bad bluff elements when you really don't have any trump cards. Out of the trump cards, I think we have only two. Finishing my speech here, we either bring an ideal or the best treaty option for truce, or will be enforced one from Russia or United States, or additional one from Europe. Or we can blackmail by giving up to Putin. We really don't have any other chances on the international arena. I will try to generate one more, Alexei, but let's go back to that table. So pay attention here. How is Article number 6 formulated? Withdrawal of Russian troops and cessation of hostilities, restoration of the state border with Russia. Understandably, these are wants. But who is going to be the subject? Who will be enforcing Russia to withdraw their troops. Where and when did this practice work? That somebody will enforce the withdrawal of troops which haven't really lost. Let's go to the next page here, please. All right, look, of course, justice, that's another want. Preventing of escalation, preventing of ecocide, more wants. Article number 10, confirmation of the end of war, including a document signed by all parties. Not clear which parties are going to sign that. Look what on Erdogan's side. A promise to conduct a referendum at 2040. Imagine Russia is using all their propaganda might on the occupied territories, and by 2040 you don't need any referendum there. On all these occupied territories, you'll know the answer that the people will give. In cursive, that's from Erdogan's side. So there at the bottom, prohibition of interfering into internal affairs of another country in any way that could lead to destabilization of that government. I don't understand who can prohibit that. League of Nations, United Nations were trying to prohibit it. Both times severely failed. So we have a question here. We can create innovation here. We can suggest that United Nations is in serious crisis. We don't need to reform United Nations, but perhaps suggest a principally different organization. You're talking about a collective security structure, like say, I would say distributed structure, the way that these Rammsteins are based on, when there is a coalition for each of the directions, the coalition for tanks, coalition for jets, so distributed security forces. Here we can talk about creating another all-humanity global organization where governments, enclaves, proto-government groups, perhaps intellectual, professional, and other groups, perhaps certain corporations that are interested, all different subjects that have keys and that can manage the aspects of humanity. And in this regard, our suggestions would not be egotistical, but they would be for everybody. The suggestion would be for China, for Russia, for India, for EU, for United States. But we do not act like this. We could have created this resource. Right? We published the book recently, New Architecture for Humankind. And we're translating that into English, by the way. I think Yura has a couple of suggestions how to present it in the West, but we will be pushing it. We, from ourselves, as the group of intellectuals, trying to work like this. But we don't even know whom should we reach out to, whom can we work with on the side of power, of the official government, Office of the President, National Security Office, President himself. Is there any person who can understand that this is a huge resource, an innovation suggestion for the whole world that creates, as you say, a structure of distributed security on one hand, and also a structure for, and also the structure for administering global conflicts? These are strong advantages, could be comparable with advantages on the front. Here I would pause and ask your opinion. All right, Sergey, this is an interesting document, very revealing, actually. The right side of it is not supplied by anything, is not supported by any side or any country. All these nice wants that you do not interfere with other countries. Okay, what, you're gonna suppress and cancel all the non-commercial entities? Because there's a mechanism of a soft interference, right? In Russia, they're calling them, you have to preclude all your statements and all your work that you're a foreign agent. In China, they're prohibiting that. You sure United States will go for that? And other forms of influence like TikToks and YouTubes and everything will be controlled or cancelled. So all these wants, they're not provided with any real support for real. And referendum at 2040, of course, there won't be even people left at these territories who remembered what Ukraine was like by that time. And the left side is even funnier, the Ukraine side, because these are asks from the country that is somewhere between France and India in its mind, as if it had nukes and the whole arms production cycle like France, and like India would have the biggest population, which can go to the enemy who occupied 20% of their territory and successfully holding it, could come to such an enemy and say, well, you know what, skedaddle, or, well, whoop your butt. But what are we going to fight them with, to expel them with, if even the last bullet we have is not our own, but supplied by the West? So our wants need to be diminished, even for the beginning positions of these negotiations. They need to be shrunk. And I think we should not be shrinking them. We should present something that would present the absurdity of the right side and counter it with something actionable. So indeed, come up and suggest, look, we're now in a phase where we'll either fight for 10 or 15 years, Taiwan, Israel, Iran, Balkans, Ukraine, other places, or we'll spend these 10 to 15 years discussing and figuring out how do we secure the world, because Potsdam-Yalta system and its main tool, United Nations, is not working. So instead of fighting for the next 15 years, let's talk for the next 20 years and freeze all the conflicts, stop all the conflicts until the decision is made. Up until 2040, no wars. We're just sitting and discussing how do we live on this planet. This would have been much more real, a better suggestion. We could have brought the whole humanity, different influence groups, discussions. Ukraine, for the first time, would have a generally intellectual and realistic, if we decide to, bring a suggestion of the global scale resolution that we never have produced before, the level of Tehran meeting at the end of the Second World War. So our position would be not to beg for arms in these conditions or blackmail by giving up to Russia and switching sides, but by suggesting such a peace accord that would impress everybody, that everybody would say, well, this is a fantastic solution, great, no Taiwan, no other conflicts, let's sit down and discuss, or at least those who want to and ready to. By the way, the first steps are already made, however romantic and absurd they would sound, but even for the peace formula on Malta, we gathered over 60 countries, which is not realistic, right? But in Switzerland, over 100. That's an alternative to United Nations, right? You can bring really great suggestions there to which the whole humanity can react. Because otherwise, what's on the left side of this document is not even funny, given that Russia was not even invited to this group. And they're hoping that we'll get support of 100 countries and present a plan to Russia, to which it'll say, okay, we've been fighting here for 2 years, wasted half of our equipment and hundreds of thousands of our people, and now we'll just pack our bags and go. Right? Is that the hope? And if he doesn't, if Putin continues fighting. Now, also pay attention that there is an interesting thing on our suggestions. Investigation of war crimes of Russia. So people who are writing this document were expecting Russia to stay mum and would not suggest to investigate military crimes of Ukraine. Have they even occurred? Right? That's a normal question, right? That's a good question, Sergey. These articles can be regulated only by mutual cancellation and non-guilt statement. Well, yeah, if you're watching our propaganda TV marathon, you know that we don't have any war crimes, right? We just don't. Except for we only don't ratify Roman statutes, right? Exactly, because we don't want to be responsible. All right. There are several other uncomfortable questions that need to be addressed. Can we, and I'm dumping the questions here, can we afford to continue losing our power generating capability and losing more people until it becomes a circumstance of a huge force? Look, Alexei, I'll put a question here as a title for this element of the stream. Is it the bottom of the war, or have we reached the bottom and then somebody knocked from below? Well, no, it is not the bottom. If we lose the complete capacity to generate electricity or transmit it to the required areas, we'll be in a position where we will have absolutely zero things to trade with. For now, we have generally okay position. There are no hunger revolts, there are no separation movements in different regions, and we still have another 300,000 people alive who will probably be killed if we do not seize and find a way to solve this war, if we'll continue depleting Russia with us. So this approach into a Paraguay option, right now we still have some terms, but we are drifting in a direction where these conditions may become what is also known as force majeure. And the main threat is that our difficult circumstances will turn into force majeure. And the scenario where we are right now, when we try to push Russia and the global South into accepting the compromise in force when Ukraine is in a better position than Russia and the global South by extension, and or continue blackmailing the West to transfer us so much equipment that we would actually have a chance of destroying Russia on the front. The probability of that option is much lower than the probability of transferring of our difficult circumstances into a force majeure. This is the dilemma that we're ultimately facing. Obviously, things are pretty bad in Russia too, economically as well. And we could have made it worse if they would not be holding our hands that much. Oil industry is not the only one that we can attack. If they would be giving us a bit more equipment, not 5 times as we request, but at least twice more than we get, we could definitely deplete Russia to a degree that would put us in a more favorable position. But the West is not doing that at all. Alexei, a simple question. If we, by extraordinary effort, reach a reduction by 50% of Russian oil refinery capacity, do you think it'll put Russia on the knees? No, it won't. I don't think so. It'll be a force majeure for them. This Titanic will lean to one side, but it will not sink yet. Right. And for us to get our force majeure, they need to destroy all energy systems of Ukraine and a lot of other infrastructure. Well, look, Sergei, we can still sink Russia at a cost of national suicide. We can fall into the abyss together. Like, we could have blown, for example, all the nuclear stations that we have here, right? It'll, by extension, destroy Russia's west as well. Do we really want that scenario? And that's it. Look, Alexei, from what you're saying, when the West is not giving us enough arms and resources, even though they do have some positions closed pretty well, but there are others that are definitely in deficit. And we know that how much more old equipment Russia can remove from conservation and throw into fight. And that is basically a factor that they're using diligently. We can get more of the same old equipment from the West, from the US warehouses and Europe probably too, less Europe, more United States, because we have already pulled a lot of things out of Europe. So the fact that it is not being given to us willingly, it indicates that this is a method of pushing us to negotiations, to peace accords. If you don't want to listen to us, you will end up there anyway, right? Is that the message? Okay, what is the probability, Yuri, that will change the position of the West? Probably near zero. It was formed over the lapse of 2 years. It was modeled many times. It was negotiated by all the sides in the West. It is very concerted, and our influence is a minimal factor, a minimal effect on that, on the backdrop of them talking between each other, talking to China, keeping communications with Moscow. This is a vanishingly significant element, our effort. So the West will continue pushing both sides to a peace treaty, depleting Russia by means of Ukraine and depleting Ukraine and our stubbornness by lack of support. And they only need to transfer difficult conditions into the force majeure for us, and they will also present it as, look guys, you did it to yourself. We offered you back in autumn of 22, spring of 23, in 24, we suggested that you sign some peace accords. I'll say at the get-go, they will not let us lose dramatically. They will not let Russia get to Dnieper and acquire much more of our territory. Russia might capture Toretsk and move for another 12 kilometers, but that's about it at a cost of huge expense. Russian counteroffensive will fail as well, but we will lose more people. We will lose more industry. We'll lose more production capabilities. Alexei, I think there is one more thing we're forgetting here about, because I keep thinking about it. Destruction of Kharkov and Odessa. These are the things that today hurt for all Ukrainians, because we understand that these cities are being turned into rubble. This is a big problem. It's not even a problem of the left bank of Don River. These people are under dual attack, actually. These people are saying that on the Russian side, we understand you. It hurts, but we can help you. Just change sides, come to us. And from Ukraine, the citizens of those places are getting message, well, no, you're not fighting strong enough. You need to be as fiery as everybody else in Ukraine. Okay, Sergei, we can ask a key question here, a strategic question. What for? We are stubborn now. For what? What do we want to win? Withdrawal of Russian troops? I can guarantee you that's not going to happen. 101%. What else do we want? Acknowledgement by Russia, the responsibility for this war and punishment of certain physical persons and Putin's government elements and probably paying us reparations. Yeah, we can probably get them to pay us some reparations on certain conditions. They'll probably return our prisoners of war. I don't think they'll ever accept being punished for that. What else are we fighting against? Are we fighting to preclude Russia from binding us with their will to go one way or the other? We already have done that, and the West will not let Russia manage us. So, okay, Alexei, I want to interject here. We are being stubborn to not for, but to not to. We're being stubborn so that Russia would not arm itself again and would not start the war again. But we're skipping the same moment that, Russia will still continue arming itself. And shall we? And if we do not find a way to preserve the remainder of our potential, then Russia in 3 or 5 years wouldn't even have to do much. We can get to such a level of destruction of our capabilities that they wouldn't need to wait for 3 or 5 years. They'll take a swarm, whatever we do. The destruction may be of such a level that they wouldn't even need to come here again. So people are thinking that the second war is still necessary, and it may not be so. Well, listen, Sergei, we're talking about the historic role of Ukraine and historic destiny of our country and existence of our country as such, because our politics is threatening to turn us into a very small territory that will be dwindling over time, and human capital will be washed away under pressure. Not necessarily military, it could be economic, cultural, etc. It will be shrinking more. It already shrunk significantly, and it will continue on this vector, because the price that we're paying for, let me formulate here a collective opinion that you voiced in a different fashion. A collective opinion of many military officers, those who think that we don't have choice, we need to resist. Russia is coming here to destroy us. We need to continue and convince the West to become wiser till they understand that there are no other options and they have to support us significantly so we can destroy Russia and Russia would fall apart. And this is the thinking of many of the smart military officers. In this chart, you can draw a chart of the West getting wiser and the chart that depicts our depletion. And these graphs do not correlate, unfortunately. We're getting depleted much faster than the West is getting wiser. How is this dilemma being suggested to be solved by the smart officers and our liberals and the rest? Good question. And the office of the president. How would they answer that dilemma that we're depleting faster and we're losing our chances? We're losing our trajectory. Difficult conditions may turn into force majeure in about a year, when we would be at the bottom of our chart without an option to get to the even middle scenario due to depopulation, deindustrialization. What next? Because we're talking about no less than what country shall we be after this war? The third world or the fourth world or the fifth world country? That's not even being considered, because the future beyond war and beyond peace accords is not being reviewed in Ukraine. We're not thinking about it now. We need to win, and then after that, whatever. That's how Paraguay acted. And Paraguay, for 100 years after this war, is still coming back to its norm from that heroic war. They even had to allow polygamy to try to resolve the depopulation crisis. That's why I don't know if we're doing any modeling in Ukraine. I will say it here, no, we don't. At least not in the way the West does. But if we would be doing it, it would show us a very difficult result, that our graph is falling faster. The West is being convinced, yes, step by step, but much slower, at a much slower rate than we need to survive. Because if the West wanted to, we would be depleted at a much slower rate. But they're not doing it. This is not their strategic goal. Their strategic goal is to weaken Russia and to lead Russia to the state where it doesn't present any serious obstacle or serious threat to the world. They will present some threat, so they'll get some Strategic Arms Treaty 3, and they'll present some options for Russia's future development, but in essence, they will not be presenting a big threat in the future. Russia's goal is to get to Caribbean crisis too, and the West is trying to prevent it from going. Except for Ukraine is missing from this solution. It is between West and Russia. All right, Alexei, I remember a movie with from the Soviet times, The Inhabited Skies, with Leah Hijekova. By the way, she's supporting Ukraine even though she's a Russian actress. She was asking a question. Do you feel pity if I turn it like this? No, we don't. Do you feel pity if we turn it like this? No, we don't. So she was twisting that question. It seems like we are trying to solve the same thing. How do we make the West feel pity for us? What's our game? What is our game in convincing them sooner? Sergey, we are pushing them in a very significant vector, I think. We are pushing the vector of Russia will take our resources and become stronger if we lose. Well, that's the blackmail, right? Indeed. And the West is not really reacting to it too much. If we honestly voice it to the end, then we'll get the same reaction that everybody in Ukraine is screaming about, that Arestovich is the FSB agent. Because the scenario, if Russia will occupy Ukraine, is much easier to resolve right now. We can just decide to stop this war, join Russia, and we'll save about 600,000 on their side, 300,000 on our side, and we may even find an agreement with Putin that everybody who do not like the scenario will be given a chance to leave Ukraine. All the nationalists, activists, everybody who wants to continue resistance. Alexei, we're getting a pushback. People are saying that this was done before. And remember when Petlura lost and we de facto went under the Bolsheviks? It was rather painful for us. It turned out pretty bad, right? Indeed, it's a bad scenario for us. So our blackmail is not real. The left side of the chart you showed before is kind of a wishful thinking without any material support. It's a very bad bluff. I don't know which other words to use here. What's the bad hype, right? Somewhere very shaky in terms of the grounds you stand on. With all due respect to the creators of this document, because they somehow managed to get 100 countries to visit Switzerland under this suggestion, Peskov recently made a statement from Moscow that they'll not go with this proposal and they will try to revive Istanbul agreements, by the way. But we need to consider circumstances on the ground. The problem is that the moment we started causing serious damage to Russia on its territory, we immediately were pulled back by the main sponsor, main ally, United States. Do not hit the oil refineries. And here everything became crystal clear. Until that, those proponents who are supporting the plan, let's blackmail the West till they give us more arms and will give us enough support. But after United States told us, or not the whole United States, but the current administration told us to not do that, we have another option here, that perhaps we can wait till autumn, see if Trump wins, and with him we can play, and he's a rough person. If he suggests a peace plan that Russia would not like, he might even send us bombers. So, all right, that's another scenario. We can go till a little later, right? To elections to November, or maybe to the February of 25, when Trump really comes into office. And then we perhaps can sit down and consider with the United States to figure out a peace treaty. So we could answer United States right now that in the situation of your undefined future, the best thing we can do is continue fighting, and we can get back to the topic of peace accords by the spring of 2025. Until then, yeah, we will fight for a full 3 years, and until then, no changes will be possible. They would actually probably consider that as a serious suggestion. Even under current circumstances, the Biden administration wants to finish this war and strike some peace accords. But we're not even doing that. Right? So my resume is simple. Our blackmail doesn't quite work. It's constructed rather poorly as a document. Second, it's not really working on the West. Third, the blackmail of the West is available to us in only two extreme options. First is to suggest either the best suggestion of collective security system, or to completely surrender and join Russia in force. because otherwise it's like blackmailing somebody who gives you a means for that blackmail. It doesn't quite work. And perhaps we continue being stubborn, and we're running a risk of turning difficult circumstances into force majeure. And we're lowering the trajectory for our country for the future without an option to revive it back to the pre-war positions. Alexei, why the situation here is going towards force majeure? Because only in the situation of force majeure, political leader, President Zelensky, can somehow justify that. Until force majeure occurs, his non-acceptance and the protests inside Ukraine against his possible position of peace treaty can be so strong that he cannot even consider that. Possibly, Sergei. But if our people spend another winter without electricity, perhaps they'll be more pliable to sign peace agreement. But the problem is that this peace agreement will be worse than what is being offered today. Today's one is worse than was in 22nd in Istanbul. So next year we'll have more destruction in our industry, more killed people, more destroyed energy generation and transfer capabilities. A little bit more of lost territory, perhaps not that much, but some still. And then what he will say on his judgment day, facing the creator, he'll say, I needed to wait for that moment to sign a truce. And I did all that just to not be accused that I signed a peace treaty with Russia when it was not supported by people. So I led the situation to be even more absurd, caused death of 70,000 more people and the destruction of 2 more cities, but now I'm not guilty, right? Is that the message? So, Alexei, understand that the bottom is not reached yet, right? We're heading towards force majeure. And neither West, nor Russia, nor our patriots inside Ukraine can turn us from this vector, because this decision can be apparently made only under force majeure circumstances. Right. And Sergei, the West is in what position? They're saying, well, if you want to go this way, you will go this way, right? We have a package of options for you to sit down and negotiate, but if you don't want to do that, then let life teach you. If we cannot, you will still have to do as we tell you, on one simple reason, because you're taking everything from us. It's difficult to be a teenager and blackmail your parents and demand to be treated as adult when everything that a teenager has, from a toothbrush to the pocket money, comes from his parents or belongs to his parents. And we are in that situation. You can perhaps lead your teen when he has nowhere to sleep and he is rebelling so much that he is somewhere on a bench in a park with a fever, right? But eventually he'll still come back. And right, and why not sooner? And why at a much lesser cost? Alexei, you have not dealt with the most difficult teens. Some of them managed to destroy the whole year of their parents' life with such force. Well, right, we can, in a way. We have 2 options. We basically can say we either join Putin against you, and that's a negative, or the positive, once again, to instill this thought upon our listeners, that we bring a peace treaty plan, a new one that will replace the existing system, or at least will start the discussion in the proper vector. The better one than Russians, Turks, Americans can suggest, which we can. Alexei, there is one condition. Somebody needs to be playing this game. You and me is not enough. Right, the whole damn paradox is that this game is already being played. The formula for peace is already a vector in this direction. 100 countries in Switzerland, that's already half of the United Nations, right? Depending how you count Somalia and some others. But that's basically an alternative United Nations. Bring the proper plan there instead of this collection of wishful thinking that you can barely get your mind around. A plan that takes interests of all parties into consideration. First of all, ours, of course, but Russia's as well, America's as well, Europe's as well. And we need to grow from being a small regional country mindset to a bigger player, where our interests are part of European interests. And we, instead, are bringing a plan where we have our very little local interests on the very top. It doesn't work like this. We are already having 20% of our territory occupied. We are on the dripper, and the dripper is provided, the solution is being provided by the West. Right, I can take my hat off to our boldness and the fact that we gathered 100 countries to discuss this document. I'm very surprised at that. But that only shows the degree of confusion with these countries. They see that the world is falling into an abyss and there is no better plan. And look at what Erdogan has suggested. This is also not a smart plan. It is not provided with any backups. But even that is being taken as a basis for discussion, because there's nothing else. And if we bring at least somewhat reasonable plan to the arena, many countries would have jumped on that bandwagon, even if it came from Burkina Faso and not from Ukraine. But from Ukraine, as side of this conflict, that would have been accepted wildly. That would added us more authority on the world scene, and as a country who came up with this initiative. But for some reason, well, we are doing it, right? We're just doing it outside of the government. The best success of Zelensky administration is his peace formula. I don't understand how did he get 60 or 100 countries to sign up under this plan. But again, I think it only shows the degree of their loss, of their confusion. The best way would be to bring up a really well-balanced document that considers real interests of sides. But here's the level of our thinking. When I suggested this plan in October, I was written off as Russian spy, because everybody who is thinking in Ukraine is a possibly Russian spy. Now, when the United States, Russia, and Turkey are presenting a different version of it, and then Europe is going to present theirs, then who's a spy? Who brought this idea half a year ago? Who thought of it half a year ago? Sorry, I didn't want to point fingers here and praise myself, apologize, but nothing is lost yet. We can still change that peace formula, and instead of making it a historic takeover, a historic win over Russia, we can turn it into being international agreement about international security, about bringing new system of international security. And today, all countries that decide to support that system would need to go into discussions and start negotiating. It may last for years, but it's better than hot war, right? I can see one game here, Alexei. You're presenting that vision now. This is an intellectual game above the governments, above the level of governments. If we could find these people in Europe, in United States, in India, in China, even in Russia, and create a group of that conversation on the intellectual level. Let me reveal a serious mystery to Sergei. First of all, these people are already found. They have heard me, seriously, and there is already an unofficial concordat, an agreement between these people who are trying to push this idea. Not the last people in their influential circles, some in government, some in academia, others in business. This work is already being carried out. The problem is that compared to the initiatives and the stubbornness of the governments, our forces are much weaker than the governmental forces. But we're not giving up. We continue to move in this direction. We definitely have been heard, and you will see that in the near future. You'll see some of the public initiatives showing that our messages, my messages, did reach the right people. Amen. Let's hope for this sincerely. Let's just pray to that. Are you an Orthodox or a Catholic? I'm my own. All right. And as a character who is very close to our Ukrainian way of life, remember the Groundhog Day? The main character was saying there, let's pray for peace. And they've been doing that, I don't know how many times, right? And drink something to it, whatever she was drinking. Andy McDowell, right? She was playing that character. All right. I think here we can conclude, but before we do that, please support our fundraisers under the stream. Alexei has one on his channel under this video. I have on mine. We're gathering additional 30,000 for radio electronic warfare system, for Special Services Detachment, and Alexei has another one for Ukraine Armed Forces. We need to support it. As somebody wrote in the chat, doesn't matter how he put a cross on himself, he was sincere. That's the main thing. And I think the main thing is for us as Ukrainians to understand what is going on and to help our audience to navigate through that world, because people who know, they can go in the right direction. They can help everybody get there. Thank you, Alex Arestovich. Thank you to our bloody philosopher, Sergei Datsyuk. And thanks to me for everything good that I'm doing for this studio. Hugs. Don't forget to subscribe. See you later.